This is the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, also the 12th chapter. Jesus said, "I came to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what stress I am under until it is completed. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one household will be divided. 3 against 2, 2 against 3, they will be divided. Father against son, and son against father. Mother against daughter, and daughter against mother. Mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law." He also said to the crowds, "When you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say, 'It is going to rain,' and so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, 'There will be scorching heat,' and it happens. You hypocrites! You know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time?" The Gospel of the Lord. So one of the more distressing things about the world today is that we seem to be getting more and more polarized. We are divided up, or we divide ourselves up, between us and them. And it seems that no matter how hard we try, we're always caught up in some kind of constant conflict. And so we try to minimize the conflict and the division. We choose to live and work in places where most people kind of think and act more or less like us. We read or listen to news that gives us confirmation bias, and we try hard not to get into conversations that very quickly become difficult. And we all have lists in our minds of who the people are that we're going to have difficult conversations with, and we try to avoid those at all costs. Most of all, we'd like God to be a refuge from the division and the stress. At least we know that God loves us even if other people do not. And a little peace in our lives can go a long way, especially when the rest of the world seems to be falling apart. But today, Jesus comes along and says, "Do you think that I have come to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division." And my first reaction is to respond, "Gee, thanks, Jesus, but really, I don't need any more help with division and stress in my life." And yes, actually, I did think you came to bring peace on earth, because back about 10 chapters ago, that's what the angels sang about when you were born. They didn't sing, division and stress, to all on earth. They said peace on earth, and that's what I would like. I want Jesus to be about peace in my life. I really like when Jesus is about peace in my life, and you probably do too. We don't want Jesus to be a source of stress and division in our relationships, in the society around us, or in our politics. And not infrequently throughout the ages, Christians have worked hard to edit Jesus so that Jesus is not a source of division and stress in our lives. This was easier, even in the world in which I grew up. Christianity was such a dominant force that it minimized division in our families, because a lot of us came from families where everybody, all the in-laws, outlaws, bylaws, and everybody at least paid lip service to being Christian. Yeah, we're all, and families would go to church together more so than they do now, even if people didn't really want to be there. They would still come along, and I still see this every once in a while, Christmas and Easter, the whole group comes together, and you're looking out there at all the smiling faces, except for a few people are standing there going, "I have come because I am forced to come, but I'm going to." But, it was less stress and division, because everybody at least said, "Oh, yeah, I pledge allegiance to Christianity." Whereas people today are absolutely much more willing to say, "No, I'm really not into this church stuff." Christianity was such a dominant force that it minimized division in our society. Remember blue laws? You could not do things on the Christian Sabbath. You could not buy or sell things. So there was no stress or conflict, because there were no soccer games on Sunday morning. There was nobody who was going to say, "What do you mean you're not coming out to brunch or play golf, because you're going to some church event in the afternoon or getting together with church people?" That's just the way it was. I remember getting even caught up, early on in my ministry, right after I was ordained. I was in my first congregation, and I was looking around and thinking, "Oh my gosh, I don't think we have enough wine for communion." So I got in my car and drove up the street to the 7-Eleven, which was open. And I said, and this was in Prince George's County where you could buy wine in 7-Eleven. And I said, I need to buy a bottle of wine. They said, no, not before noon, Sunday. I get an exemption from blue laws. I want it for communion. Didn't work that way. Just kept going. And Christianity was such a dominant force in our lives that it insulated us from any stress in our politics, or we worked hard to make it work like that. We all thought that our laws just reflected our faith, and there could be no conflict between the laws of God and the laws of the state. They were just the same thing. And so I'm always very amused, and I say this without taking a position on one way or the other, but all these debates and battles between people who think that the Ten Commandments should be on the front door or on the front lawn or on someplace in the courthouse because, they're the basis of our laws. And, I've never studied law, but I do teach 10 Commandments. And I find it amusing because only 2 of the 10 Commandments, and sometimes a third, are actually enshrined in United States criminal law. You cannot steal, and you cannot murder. That's it. There's a third one. You cannot bear false witness, but only if you're under oath. If you're not under oath, then bearing false witness is just called campaigning or marketing. It's not illegal. And the First Amendment basically takes the whole first table of the Ten Commandments and says you can't enforce that. You cannot tell people they have to worship God or honor the Sabbath or not take God's name in vain, all that stuff. So it's not really the thing. But, we all thought that. That was just the way it was. And if it seemed like somehow the laws of God and the laws of the state were kind of conflicting, we worked hard, and congregations and denominations still do this, working hard to edit Jesus in such a way that it makes it feel like the laws are really about our version of Jesus. We edit Jesus like that. And truthfully, I would really like to edit almost everything that Jesus says in today's gospel reading. Maybe that's why I did not catch it in the editing of the bulletin. I just edited the entire gospel reading out from last week's. But I'd like to edit a lot of these first words of Jesus where he talks about division and stress. In fact, one of the commentaries that I was reading as I was getting ready for this said, these sayings of Jesus about stress and division and setting father against mother and all this kind of stuff, all of these things are like the 10 sayings that we would most like to ignore the fact that Jesus said. But with or without today's sayings of Jesus, it's always tempting to edit Jesus in our lives in such a way that Jesus will not cause stress or division for us. And we do this all the time. We do this by doing things that Jesus does call us to do that, frankly, we would probably do anyway. And honestly then, we're too busy to do any of the more uncomfortable things. So Jesus tells me to love my neighbors, and my neighbors are okay, so I'll love them. And I just don't have any time left, Jesus, to pray for my enemies or those who persecute me because I'm too busy doing this other thing over here that I would do anyway. We edit Jesus in our lives by focusing on ideas and principles that make sense to us socially and politically. And after a while, it seems that Jesus is just like one of us, and certainly not like one of them, whoever we call us and them. And we don't like to be reminded of Bible verses that get in the way of our neat little edited Jesus. In fact, that's probably how Jesus started to get in trouble in today's gospel reading. All this stuff about setting father-in-law against mother-in-law, or mother against daughter-in-law, and father against son-in-law, and all that kind of stuff. You recognize those, of course, as Jesus is quoting Micah. You recognize those verses from Micah, right? And if you don't, nobody in Jesus' day did either, because they like to not read those verses, and Jesus quotes them to them. And that gets in the way and causes stress and division when you see the entire Bible and not just the verses that you like, and that's what Jesus was doing. And we edit Jesus whenever we dwell on his life and his resurrection and all the miracles and all the fun stuff about Jesus, instead of dwelling and thinking about his suffering and death. And that's because when we think about stuff like Jesus' impending suffering, which is what today's gospel talks about, It reminds us of the suffering and the death that we have to face in our own lives. And frankly, we would just like to ignore that as long as we possibly can. And so we edit Jesus in a way that makes Jesus more comfortable to us. But real, unedited Jesus has a tendency to keep getting in the way of our editing. And that's really what causes the stress and division. And when we hear these words of Jesus, it's not that Jesus is trying to be a pain in our lives. It's just that anything real and powerful and important will eventually make us change and grow in ways that will unavoidably cause stress and division for us. Real, unedited Jesus always gets in the way of our attempts to edit him. On the other hand, real, unedited Jesus is really who I need for my real, unedited life. Edited Jesus, who only speaks of peace, would be great if my life were only filled with peace. Edited Jesus, who never causes division, would be great if my life were not already filled with stress and division. Edited Jesus, who never asks me to examine my values or priorities, would be great if the world never changed or brought me into contact with new people and new experiences. But that's not my world, and it's not yours either. And so even though I'm inclined to resist the unedited Jesus of today's gospel reading, it's the real, unedited Jesus who I really need. It's the real, unedited Jesus who you really need, because only the real, unedited Jesus can actually save us. In the end, it's actually good to have real, unedited Jesus. And that's because it's only the Jesus who challenges us on the reality of our failings who can credibly promise us forgiveness. It's only the Jesus who suffers through division and stress and who walks with us through our division and stress who can actually promise us peace. And it's only the Jesus who suffers and dies who actually can give us real and certain hope of new and everlasting